I'm only going to say one or two things, and that is that he has spent much of his life living in Hong Kong and much of his life writing about Hong Kong history. This is how our session's going to go today. Pat will tell you a bit about himself in a few minutes. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we will open up the floor to more questions. We have more than 1 hour. We have almost 70 minutes, yes, I believe so. So I think there should be plenty of time for Pat to help tell you pretty much anything you want to know. And when it comes to the questions, you can use English or 都可以用中文問, I think, right? That's okay, right? Some questions? So again, we're going to have plenty of time. And do you want to say just a few words about yourself, Pat?
Yeah, okay. I came to Hong Kong in October 1972. So it's quite a long time, certainly more, half my life I've spent in Hong Kong. I came to Hong Kong to work for the Hong Kong government, but very shortly after I came to Hong Kong, at the end of the 1970s, I started using my spare time to research into matters of history. Over time, I have written some 30 or so essays on Hong Kong history. Haven't counted recently, I suspect more than 30, 35 perhaps. I have always been, from the earliest days I became interested in history, which is when I was about 16, I have always been interested predominantly in the history of the ordinary people. I'm much less interested in emperors and battles and the things that are done by the central government. I'm interested in the ordinary history of ordinary people. Pingman Lixi. These are our people, these are our ancestors. Their history is our history, and it's always spoken very, very directly to me, and all my work has been on the ordinary people. And in particular, from about 1980 onwards, of the new territories, the history of the villages. I was lucky. I started my career in Hong Kong working with and for James Hayes, who's been an inspiration to me all the rest of his life before he died some few years ago. And he was very much the same as me. He, again, was interested in the ordinary people, and he was the one who urged me to work in the new territories. He started work in the 1950s and was therefore a generation before me. I was working there from about 1980, and I was there right at the very end, where it was still possible to speak with elders who had a real personal knowledge of the new territories before development, before the Japanese, before the coming of the roads, before the coming of the railway. I spoke to, and indeed I attended the funeral of, the last man I knew who had a personal memory of the coming of the British to the new territories, who could remember the Indian surveyors coming to the village, who could remember being taken by his uncle into the Kowloon City court hall to see the sub-magistrate sitting in court. So I was just in time to see and talk and discuss with the last generation of those who really understood and remembered the traditional new territories. So some 35 essays is the result on various places in the new territories. Not the new territories as a whole, because I've long felt very strongly that the history of the new territories depends on histories of the individual villages first. If we have enough history of the villages and village areas, later on somebody else can do a history of the whole of the new territories, but I have been spending my life looking at individual villages or village groups, right at the very bottom, the grassroots level. It's not an easy job. The villages, even those villages I know very, very well, tend to be very, very cautious about saying anything that might be taken as meaning that they knew something. One village that I know very well, I was very friendly with the villagers. I went there 2 or 3 times a year for 25 years to have dinner in the village, way up in the mountains. And every time I said, have you got any documents? Have you got any old deeds? No, they were all destroyed. Oh, no, they went at the time of the Japanese. And last year, I went up there and they said, would you like to see our deeds? After 30 years of asking, they said, here you are, we've got these deeds. And there they were. 3 critically important deeds. And then they then spoke to their close relative who from another village in Saikong, and he phoned me up and said, no, he didn't phone me up. I was up at the first village and he'd come there as well. And he came to see me and said, I've got some deeds as well. So it's still very, very slowly information oozing out of the woodwork, but it's slow and difficult. And how much longer it's possible to do it, I don't know. The deeds from Saikung were given to me because he said there's nobody in the village of the generation below me that cares anything. If you don't take them, they'll be thrown away. So they're now on permanent loan to the Central Library. So it's not always easy, but I've done it to the best of my ability, and I'm pleased enough with it. Of my essays, about a dozen or so have been published in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Hong Kong, a further 6 in this book, which came out about 6 years ago, and a further 6 in this book, which came out last year. This last book has been translated into Chinese, not this one, only that one, so far, although Zhong Mao is saying they might do this one as well.
Great, great.
So that's me.
Right, that's you, indeed. Excellent. In the last book, which, by the way, is about 600 pages long, if I remember correctly.
705.
705, to be exact. You mentioned in the beginning that the book advances no thesis. And I don't think this is entirely true. I actually do see a thesis that runs through this book and throughout your work in general, and that it is that local history matters, as you mentioned. And you make this very clear in every chapter of the book. And I just wonder if you could tell us a little more about what you think that we get from local history that we don't get from the history of the empresses and the emperors and so on.
Yeah. The reason I said that it doesn't advance the thesis is that one of the academic readers for this book,
It wasn't me.
it wasn't you, but it was from China, from Hong Kong U, I think,
I can't
said
hold
the book
everybody-
was valueless, it should not be published because it wasn't true history, it didn't advance a thesis. Because it didn't, it was essays, standalone essays. It didn't, okay, it has a thesis running through it, as he said, which is that local history matters. But that's why I put those words in there, is because some bright spark said it was a useless, a valueless book. It shouldn't be published. It didn't advance the thesis, and it was merely the maunderings of illiterate bumpkins. Now, you know, I confess that I find it difficult to believe that an academic in 2024, as it was then, could write such things. Could write something that says that village history isn't proper history, isn't of any value, and oral history is of no value and shouldn't be allowed to proceed. For me, local history, history at the village level has importance. I'm not trying to say it has more importance or it's the only thing that has importance. Of course not. You know, but there are so many people who look at emperors and wars and state things. You know, nobody needs to argue the point that that is important. But the local history remains very important because it is the history of people like us, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. What was their life like? What was their history like? How did they settle in the countryside? When did their villages get founded? And what was their relationship village to village? How did they deal with outsiders? It is very, very rustic and small scale, but nonetheless, I think it has something to say.
What about...
Even if some people don't agree.
Well, I'm sure that was just one person who
Well,
wrote
it's
that.
not, actually. It's not. No, there are quite a few, alas.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experience as a district officer. Do you think that it made you a better historian, or the
Yes.
other way around? Did it make you a better district officer? Your interest in local history.
I think so. It was when I was district officer, that was 1980-81, the village elders always would try and find what their district officers were interested in, so they could pander to that interest and therefore get on easier and have a smoother relationship. One of my brethren as district officer was interested in girls, and his leaders took him out to a brothel every so often. That was not my thing.
And it's not in any of your books either.
No. But it became clear that what I wanted was their memories of their childhood. And so that was easy. So every time I went out to dinner with them, which was frankly 3 times a week, we would start talking about what life was like in the 1920s and 30s when they were young and then they were teenagers and so on. And we would talk all night about these things. Strictly speaking, the people who do oral history say it's got to be recorded, you've got to write it down and as it happens and so on and so on. Try that with village leaders and they just shut up straight away. You know, this was just chat over a dinner party and there was no way I could take notes. I would go home and I'd spend half the night writing it up from memory, because otherwise I would have got nothing. But as it was, they were very forthcoming. They loved talking about their childhood. Occasionally it got difficult because as the more and more they talked about their childhood, the more likely it was they would drift off into Waidao, the local dialect of Cantonese, which I cannot speak. It is very different from standard Cantonese. And so there were difficulties. And there are places which I could not get into at all because I was the district officer and because I was male. There are some topics that they would not raise. And if I raised them, they would quietly go on and talk about something else, because it's not something they wanted to talk to the district officer about. So I didn't get from them the crimes and illegalities that they had dealt with when they were young men. And I know damn well there were some, because they wouldn't raise that with the district officer. And I couldn't get the specific female part of the equation, much as I wanted to. I got hints of it here and there, to know that there's a whole area that I couldn't ask. I couldn't ask the women, they would never answer me. It was improper, it was indecent. So I couldn't get the elderly women to talk to me, or only on a few subjects. I did know that in the traditional villages before the Japanese, unmarried pubertal girls did not sleep at home because it was regarded as improper to be sleeping in the same house as their fathers and elder brothers. So all the unmarried pubertal women or young girls would sleep together in the house of a respected widow, the ama. And they would all sleep together there. And the group of girls that were sleeping together there had the very closest of relationships. And for the rest of their life, they would call each other jimoi, sisters. And I know that the ama taught these girls everything they needed to know as women, and they would never tell me what that was. But from distant hints, one of the things they taught these girls was how to please your husband. I know they taught them the mourning songs, the songs for funerals, which are sung by women. That I know they were taught there. But there was a lot of other things taught. Unfortunately, there were no female academics asking these questions. And the old women are now all dead. And I don't know that we'll ever find out what it was. But we know there was a women's society, parallel to the Men's Society, about which we know quite a lot. The Women's Society we know very little, but we do know that it's the standard view that Chinese women were very subordinate is not strictly true. Because a man is married, this girl is here, but she isn't totally under her husband's control because she has jimoy. And almost by definition, they're in other villages. So she has her own network throughout the area. And if necessary, if her husband's being abusive, that information gets spread. I'd love to know more about it, but that's as far as I know. So yeah, it helped me to be a district officer. Being a district officer helped me to get in touch with the villagers. They had to eat meals with me 3 times a week. I had to eat meals with them 3 times a week. So we had something to talk about, and it all helped. If I had been just an academic, I would have found it awfully difficult to get hold of them at all. But I was spending 3 nights a week with them.
So I've always been struck by the number of British civil servants in Hong Kong, actually not just in Hong Kong, but other places, that became so interested in local history. You mentioned James Hayes as well, Chris Munn, whom we'll hear from later on this afternoon. You were part of a government that in many ways was also erasing local history. And I don't mean this as any sort of anti-colonial critique. This is what governments do in the name of progress and so on. And if I remember correctly, James Hayes actually mentioned this sort of irony, right? Working for the same government, but also also trying to preserve local history and whatnot. What I'm interested in here in particular is, did you get much encouragement from your colleagues in the government to do your historical work?
Well, from James Hayes, yes, a great deal.
Right.
But from the government as a whole, no, not at all.
A little more on that, please. Yes.
Most of my colleagues were ensconced in Central. They were not interested, and they tended to look down on the villagers. Not all of them, but quite a lot of them did. And no, I got no assistance, not really at all.
Okay, all right. I just want to ask 1 or 2 more questions, and then I think we should open this up. New Territories people, or indigenous people, and the Haeungi-guk, who you mentioned earlier, have often been maybe demonized in Hong Kong. Demonized, I put that in quotes, can't think of a better word necessarily. Do you think this is fair?
No, it's partly because the great majority of the population of Hong Kong are urban. They come from refugee origins, people who came to Hong Kong in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. They view the New Territories very much basically as a place where they go for a holiday, where they go to walk in the hills and so on. And they feel that the indigenous are just a nuisance, they get in the way. There's very, very little commonality of feeling. The urban people tend to despise the villagers. The villagers have strong accents, and the urban people speak better Cantonese, at least they think they do. Put it this way, the villagers much preferred having expatriate DOs to having Chinese DOs.
Interesting.
That's widespread throughout the New Territories. They say the expatriates don't have any prejudgment, and the Chinese DOs come from the city, and they have lots of prejudices.
I would ask obviously you're very passionate about local history. What is it that you would most like Hong Kong people today, whether they're Hong Kong people living in Hong Kong or Hong Kong people living, let's just say, in the UK, what do you think you would most like them to learn from Hong Kong's local history?
The fact that Hong Kong had a history, and it had a history before the coming of the British. This comes in this book. There's an essay on West Kowloon before the British. Now, the Society of West Kowloon, traditional Society of West Kowloon, has disappeared as if it had never been. There are no villages surviving. There's not one house surviving. There is only one temple surviving on its original site. There's almost nothing left. There are 3 million people living in West Kowloon. And to most of them, they do not believe that their history had anything before the coming of the British in 1870. To West Kowloon, that is, yeah. So they have a feeling that there's nothing to say about West Kowloon before British development. Now, this seems to me to be extremely sad. It tends to lead to a sort of, what's the word? They feel that it's a foreign culture that leads to Hong Kong having a history at all. And that is something which I think is extraordinarily dangerous. And if local history can do anything, it's to say that this is not true, that Hong Kong had a history of many, many hundreds of years before the coming of the British. The British did things which were very important. The urban development of Hong Kong is clearly something that was done from outside. But we had a history before that, and that's something I would like people to know. The second thing, and I think this is something which has resonated, is that in the last few years, more and more people have been urged to say and believe and write that Hong Kong history is merely a subset of China history. That China history comes first, Hong Kong history comes a long, long distant way second. That Hong Kong history is of no value when set against China history. And I think the very surprising popularity of my last book, nobody expected it, is because it doesn't mention China. It is a history of the new territories. It doesn't say this is all subject and secondary to the history of China. But young people at school are being taught this, that there is nothing in our history which isn't much more importantly done in Peking and so on. And I think that looking at local history balances the books. That local Hong Kong history is just as valuable as the national history, and it shouldn't be treated as just a subset. And I think the popularity of this book is that this is coming to it rings a bell. This rings a bell with a lot of people. The people buying this book, almost all are young people. I've given 6 lectures on the book in Hong Kong. I doubt that in almost nobody in the people who came to those lectures was older than about 35.
I was at the last one as the moderator.
Okay, what a few of them.
I was older than 35. But I think you're pretty much right. That was about it. Let's open up the floor to questions. And maybe keep your hand up until Alan can get up with the mic. And perhaps keep your questions as short as possible. Maybe remember that the best questions begin with how, when, where, or why.
Can you tell me some of the experience you have in terms of comparing and contrasting how the villages and the urbanists in Hong Kong, consider similar history events in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I think it's a question of basic views. Villages, the old village, I'm talking about villagers who were in their 80s when I spoke to them back in 1980 or 90. People whose memory goes back to the beginning of the 20th century. They, all of them very strongly take the line, you have to be ready for a famine. I don't think anybody in the city ever thinks about that. But the elderly villagers still do. Famine will come, they said. And, I've had village elders stamping their feet, saying, famine will come again. What are you going to do when a famine comes? Why do you waste so much money? Waste is something that the villagers regard as absolutely criminal. If you waste, what will you do when a famine comes? That sort of thing. A radically different worldview. The second one is, never trust a stranger. People who come from over the mountains may be bandits, Bandits came into the new territories time and time and time again. The government was powerless to stop it. So your first reaction to a stranger is a little bit of suspicion. Not necessarily immediate opposition, but who are you? Why are you here? And that I still got that. It was easier for me because I was DO. They knew why I was there. But even as a DO, I would sometimes get, why are you here? Why have you come here? So this is because the villagers were completely dependent on their own strength to deal with attack. They had nobody they could rely on, just themselves. So, you know, it was an enclosed society, not totally enclosed, because they were perfectly aware there were people coming into the village for perfectly good reasons. But their initial reaction would be initially somewhat suspicious. There was this sort of thing. There are other ones as well. And as I say, the fact that the women had their own networks makes for a very different society than in the city, where women have no networks usually of their own. In the old days, back in the 1920s, a man in the city marries a girl, it's him and her, that's it. But in the new territories, she's got sisters and cousins, and you know, and it's very important. I remember speaking to my rural committee chairman and saying, you know, how do you know that you will get so many votes in a... Oh, that village will vote for me because my grandmother's sister is the grandmother of the present VR, so we're related. Or my mother is the Jimoy of that VR's wife. So he would never dare to stand against me. You know, this network, these networks, you don't get that in the city. So there's societal things that were different in the new territories. I don't know if that answers any part of your question, but it's important.
Throughout the last 2 decades, obviously, the dynamics in the new territories have changed because of infrastructure, the introduction of the free education, and also the internet, and also the changing demographics because it got gentrified, especially Sai-Kung. So do you find that this kind of difference is closing because of these dynamics?
Yes, yes. The traditional culture in society is almost gone. It's almost gone. Not quite, but it's almost gone.
Yeah. And what does it mean to you as a historian?
Well, I find it very sad, but there we are. That's just me. But it is going very fast.
I think we had a question over there first, Alan.
Thank you. I actually have 2 questions, if I may. One is more about your research. So I believe that you got the opportunity to get in touch with different generations of Hong Kong villages. I believe that in terms of how they build their own identity, because they have gone through different life histories, what are the gaps and differences that you may see, or what are the common areas that you may see?
If you're talking about their history, the big problem is a lack of sources. You know, villages, a lot of villages have almost nothing in writing. And if they've got it in writing, they may not let me see it or tell me that they have it, as I said with my friends up in Mao Chongam. But even when they have written resources, they're patchy, they've got gaps, they're inadequate in every respect. You have to do a lot of piecing across, trying to build over holes in the information that you've got. The villagers will tell you things like, we're the 15th generation living in this village. But you've got to check it, because very often it means we are the 15th generation, but the first generation was living in the village before the one they're now living in. So you have to be very careful to take these comments at face value, although I sometimes do. It's not as simple. This afternoon we're going to be talking about family history in Hong Kong. Well, that will mostly be family history in the post-war urban setting, I think. And that's very, very different. Family history, when you go back, is you're looking at very, very shadowy information. You're looking at the memory of the elders. What did they remember? What did this man who's 80 remember of what his grandfather told him when he was 10? Which is all very nice and dandy, but may not be correct. And it's going to be biased in favor of that village. So when they're talking about relations between them and that village over there, there's bias, built-in bias. And you have to try and reduce the bias a bit, which is why this chap in Hong Kong, you said it was worthless, it was just the maunderings of country bumpkins. But it's not quite that. They did have a very strong belief in keeping the memory of their ancestors alive, but it always gets a little distorted by time. Yeah.
Thank you. So the second question is hopefully not too sensitive to us. So given the fact that history and historical narratives are often shaped by those in power, I think we can agree on this. And given the fact that in Hong Kong, I think the main narrative right now are national security. And so under this political climate, what challenges do you see historians may face in pursuing independent research? And what advice you may give to educators and students who are still pursuing independent research and doing?
Well, yes, indeed. I wrote a book on the Six-Day War in the New Territories. Where I was very scrupulous to be as balanced as I could be. And a mainland reviewer said the book was valueless, colonialist, racist, because I didn't start by talking about the evil, vicious, colonial British oppressive soldiers and the noble, brave Chinese villager patriots. In other words, if I wasn't biasing it that way, it was racist and colonialist. Now, that sort of thing is going to come up all the time, and it comes up more and more. My only hope is that people will be brave enough to withstand it.
You should have started the book with more country bumpkins. That's the problem. Yes. I think we had the question over here first. Oh, either way. Yeah.
Thank you. I remember when in the early 1970s, I was a Boy Scout going to Sai Kung to do some site surveys in Sabat Heung and all that. And I found that most of the young people there in the villages, they all migrated to the UK, both the male and the female. Therefore, it occurred to me that in fact the first major migration of Hong Kong people didn't occur in 1967 because of the communists and all that, but it's before that, in the 50s. I'm wondering whether in your research and in your encounter with the villagers, any major impact of that wave of migration of the younger generations from the villages to the UK had on the society, on the villagers, and all that?
Yes, it goes back a lot further than that. There are villages that I've discussed, that I've worked in, where in the 1890s, there were no adult male villagers resident at all. They had all gone to work on steamships in that time. Or they'd emigrated to Panama or to Jamaica or wherever. But even in the 1890s, there were New Territories villages with no adult males resident. It's been a long time, and it's part of the reason why the traditional culture has slowly disappeared. The village youths that weren't there in the 70s were coming to England. Many of them came back when they retired, they had gone to England because of a quirk in the British law. The British government didn't want Chinese people from Hong Kong coming to England. So they passed a law saying the only people who had the right to travel to England and settle there were people who were British subjects by descent. But when the British took the new territories over in 1898, they passed a law making all residents of the new territories British subjects. So by the 1930s, all adult males of indigenous villages were British subjects by descent. So they could go to England, whereas none of the urban people could. So that gave them, that made it easy for them to go, and so they went. This is particularly the case because also at the same time, that is the 1970s, they were losing water because of the reservoirs. And they could no longer farm because the water had all disappeared into the reservoirs. The government had cut the water. And so fields that had been very fertile were now dry. So it was very difficult to farm. And at the same time, the British government opened the doors to them to go to England. But a lot of them came back when they were 60 or 70. And when they came back, they tended to be very unhappy about what had happened in the village. They tended to be rather conservative, saying, why can't it be like it was when we were kids? They remembered the village when they were 15, 20 years old. Then they went away. They'd now come back at 60, 40 years later. Why isn't it the same? So sometimes the returned villagers were in fact the people supporting the old society as hard as they could.
Oh, I think.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks so much for your sharing today. I think it's really interesting as someone who's an urban Hong Konger, listening to stories and lives about Indigenous people in new territories. That's really interesting. I guess first part, I would like to respond a little bit. I think it's pretty interesting when you said for a lot of urban Hong Kongers, it seems like we perceive history of Hong Kong as only starting after the colonialism. I would just like to raise an example of, in my vague memory of history lessons, in Hong Kong, we actually learned about how there's the Song Wong Tao in West Kowloon and about the history of poets and politicians being exiled into that area. So yeah,
There was a bit, but let's be fair, you're very young. And by the time that you were at school, we were starting to have a little bit of Hong Kong history taught. It's got less in some schools now because of national security ideas that we have to be talking about China first and last. But yeah, there was a little, and it's growing, and we had people coming up to become academics in the universities who were interested in Hong Kong history back in the 1970s. It's a long-term trend. But as I said, I was talking in the late 70s and 80s to people whose memories went back to 1900, 1895, 1910. And that's the sort of period that I wanted to learn about, the period before any of the changes had come, or any of the major changes had come.
So perhaps it's like a phenomenon of almost contrasting post-British colonial education versus before, maybe during colonial time. I don't know.
It took a long time. The British changes started to change the education system in the new territories in 1913. That was the beginning, the first changes, and they were very, very small. Modern education really only starts to make an impression on the new territories from about 1930 onwards. Up until then, it had been very, very traditional. Very traditional.
I think we need to make sure we save time for others as well. We can get back to you if we have some more time.
We've got another half hour yet.
Which one should I go first?
Team Xi Jinping, I don't know, up to you.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm very interested in the ordinary people of the New Territory villages. Specifically, I think maybe you can shed some light or share some of your experience of the observation and impression of the two different ethnicity in the New Territories, the Punti and the Hakka. Can you tell us some stories or some of your observations regarding that?
Yes, it's quite interesting. The two that you mentioned, these are from the landward side. There are more ethnicities in the... Yes, but the farming people were Bunde and much of the New Territories was mixed. There are 64 villages in Sha Tin, of which 5 are Bunde and 63 are Hakka. But the Hakka villages are much smaller, and the population is about 58 and 42%, so much closer. The village community has always been mixed. The rural committee and its predecessor was both Hakka and Bunde. They met and talked with each other all the time. They knew each other. There was some intermarriage. But when I was discussing village funerals, and I was at a dinner and I was talking about what I'd learned at these funerals, and it had been a Bunde funeral, and the Hakka people said, "That's not right. You don't do that. You have to do that." And the Bunde people said, no, that was correct. That's what we do. But here were people who'd lived together for all their life and were not aware of the fact that the two communities had different funeral rituals, quite substantially different, to the point where they said, "You're not doing it right." And I thought, how did they not know? It's because if you have a Bunde funeral, your Hakka relatives and friends only get invited on day 3, which are the public days. Day 1 and day 2, when the funeral actually takes place, it's just the family. So the two communities never got to know that there were these differences. Both parties are very aware if they're Hakka or Bunde. They're very aware of it all the time. So, you know, the fact that they're Bunde or Hakka is the first thing they tell you when you're discussing it with them. They know very much that they belong to this or that ethnic group. Although they tend to be very friendly and helpful, and they call each other Hingdai, but they're still very different. Which is the only reason, really, why Hakka survived mostly. But there were places where Hakka villages slowly became Cantonese. In Dongchong, for instance, in Lantau, where the majority villages were Bunde, and Hakka villages moved in, but about half the Hakka villages became Cantonese during the latter part of the 19th century. And once they'd become Cantonese, the Cantonese accept them as Cantonese, but make sure they change their practices so that their funeral rituals are now Bunde rituals. So in some places, villages changed their ethnicity to fit in with their neighbours more, but surprisingly few, because they were very aware of who they were and wanted to stay that way. There were no serious differences between them. But mostly the Bunde people say, well, we don't marry Hakka people. And the Hakka people say, well, we don't marry Bunde people. They did occasionally. And usually, if the man marries if a Hakka man marries a Bunde girl, which was very common in places in North Lantau. Do you know the village of Tai Ho? It was notorious that half the families were Hakka men with Bunde wives. But it remained Hakka. The children spoke Hakka. But I spoke to one woman who had married into the village at the age of 16. I was talking to her when she was 78. She still couldn't speak Hakka. After all that time, she could understand it, but she never spoke it. How the mechanics of that work, I have found it difficult to understand.
Maybe that's why they keep the marriage.
That's right. Love will find a way. Yeah.
Wasn't love. These would all have been arranged marriages.
Yeah. I think we have.
Hello. I want to ask one question based on your own experience as a district officer. How common the socio-economic status of those people who live in village, or even the political status of her people, especially between and after 1997? Thank you.
Well, I was district officer in 1980. I was district officer in Sha Tin when the new town was being built. So every 5 minutes, a new family came from the urban area into Sha Tin. They were almost invariably Cantonese speaking. So the rural community was being swamped. So I was doing my best to help it survive, help the villagers survive within a more and more overpowering Cantonese influx. Not easy, didn't work. It did work for a bit, but didn't work in the long term. Now, it's my successors as district officer no longer really care for the villagers. The villagers are slipping back. The villages that survive within the urban area are more and more falling down into becoming slums. Within the new towns, the villages are fewer and fewer. A lot of them are giving up and going to live in the UK or the Netherlands or wherever, renting out their houses at very low rates. So it deteriorates further and further towards a slum. Hasn't got as far as it has in Samjun, where the villages that are buried within the Samjun development are absolute plague pits. Have you been to Nam Tao? Any of you been to Nam Tao? It's a plague pit. It's a slum. It's the old city. It's the capital of this area. It's where the magistrate lived, but it's dirty, stinky, full of rats. It's very sad. It's very sad. It's historically the most important site, and it's just indescribably awful. Isn't it, my love?
Sorry, the last time I visited this 5, 6, 7 years ago. Yeah, it's same as what you said. Very sad. But lots of people live there.
It's cheap.
And it's very traditional.
It's cheap.
I mean, you can see the houses, the people's life way, are same as before.
Yes.
And there was, I want to read another question about the 领导啊, the people, the 水上人. So I haven't ever seen any research about Hong Kong on them. They were more traditional than new territories people, right?
They were. I've never worked on them. I've never worked with the Soi Song Yan. James Hayes did some, but not a lot. Partly because they're very suspicious of outsiders. If the landward villagers are suspicious of outsider, the Soi Song Yan are much more suspicious. It's very difficult to talk to them and get any sense out of them. They have their own very strange customs. It's a very difficult community. They were almost all illiterate.
I have parents-in-law. They are from the Shuishan. Okay. They're interesting. They told me lots of stories of their life, even before Japanese and after and during the Japanese occupied Hong Kong there 3 years. It's funny stories. It makes people laugh, but it's their life.
Yeah, but no academics have really worked on them. I haven't. I haven't. I've never researched the Soisongyan.
Like they help the people who come from mainland. They get them from water, and then dress them, give food to them, and then send them to Taiwan for life. And my mother-in-law said she saved 100.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's just I don't know them. I've never worked with them. What I know of the Soisongyan is what the land people say of them. Which in places is very interesting.
Yes, I have something to supplement about the recent few questions. I myself is I worked in the Taiyo village since 1985 after I graduated from the university.
Where is he?
And I worked there as a community worker. So I just we do the community development project there. So we work with those local rural committee and also the fishermen. So basically, they are not the Hakka. They call them Danga. Yeah.
Well, yes, but you could get into serious trouble if you call them that.
They don't mind, but because they don't.
I assure you they mind when I say it.
Although Danga is a term for some kind of stigmatization.
It means born from an egg.
Just a few clarifications. Actually, the Hakka in Taiyo, they just come over from mainland China later, maybe after the Second World War. So they traveled all the way from Yangon and in Guangdong with the ship and landed in Taiyo. All right. Well, I would say that actually there are some researches on the fishermen's culture. When I was working there in the mid-1980s, so there were a team of Chinese university students. Every year they will come back to do some kind of.
Yes, I know of them. I know of them and I know of their work, but it really hasn't been published as well as it should have been. There's been some publication, but there's a lot more needs to be said.
Because at that time we just held down to liaise with some older generation of the fishermen, so they will have some kind of speaking history, and they do document it. And now titles like the Dragon Boat Cruise becomes a world United Nations something like that event. It's all because of their studies in the 1980s.
Well, the more that is the Soisongyan are studied and the more information we get and published, the better. But not a great deal has been yet. Not enough.
Right.
Not enough.
I agree with you because I'm not in history. I'm doing some kind of social work. And I didn't touch history after my graduation from the university. But I'm very interested in the cultural and human process.
Yeah, so am I. But these books are all on the landward people. There is an essay in here on the port towns, but it's basically looking at them as towns, and the towns were run by the land people, not the sea people.
Yeah.
So it really, and I've never ever interviewed a Soisongyan.
Yeah. But in my perceptions, actually, the land people in the new territories, they are also Hakka.
Half.
Yeah.
The people in Yunlong are Bunde. The people in there's a strong, as I say, 42%, 40-something% of Sha Tin is Bunde. The dominant villages in Sai Kung are Bunde. The dominant villages in Kowloon were Bunde. Much of Lantau was Bunde. It's about half and half.
I would think it will depends on your definition. Like even the Tan's family in Yunnan, they are also Hakka, but they come much earlier, maybe 800 years ago. But their origin is from the mainland.
They're not Hakka though. The only Bunde, major Bunde family that has any memory of ever being Hakka are the Lius of Seongsai. But the Dungs and so on, these are people who've been Bunde as far back as we can trace it.
I think we should move on just a little to make sure we have time for everyone as well. Thank you.
Last point now. So in Chinese history, there were 3 major Hakka migration southwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the last one is come to Hong Kong. Yeah, thank you.
How concerned are you in light of the love of historical revisions of the CCP, even with local history and small history? How concerned are you?
I am concerned. That the reviewer who said my book on the Six-Day War shouldn't be published because it was racist and colonialist, because I didn't follow the party line, struck me as being dangerous. It hasn't stopped me continuing to work, but I can see that there might be young historians who will feel that there are a lot of topics they're not willing to consider because it might get in the way of the powers that be.
And that comment was 10 years ago or so, wasn't it? The one on the...
12 years ago,
yeah,
yes.
right.
Thank
Okay.
Me as well. How deep do you think the Triad network ran across the new territories? And it's a 2-part question. And do you think what were the main advantages and disadvantages of that network?
I don't think the Triad network extended very far into the villages, but it was there in the market towns. I doubt that it was very, very socially negative. Given the total absence of any police forces in the traditional new territories, because the government was very, very weak. So you have a town like Samshupo or a town like Chengzhou with 7,000 people and no adequate police force. Triad controllers would probably be, on the whole, doing a positive job, actually. In this book, there's an article on the 2 squatter areas, and one of those squatter areas was run by the Triads, and run very effectively by the Triads, in the absence of any effective policing.
She, right here. I know she's had her hand up for a while, but okay, go ahead.
Very quick, sorry. So thank you very much for your research and your book. I'm very amazed. And so my question is very short. Will you be considered to have some video record for the history? I mean, like nowadays you're getting. Why I know you because I saw the YouTube video. You have something.
So did many other people, yes.
1.4 million viewers.
More than that, actually.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, and you are getting old and very confused about like the future books.
Well, I don't like doing radio recordings, although I have no objection to it in principle, but I don't think anybody is interested. This is being recorded. Yes.
Thank you very much for very.
Put your hand up.
Sorry, I'm here.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for a very interesting and inspiring talk. The question I like to mention is when you mentioned you first came to Hong Kong in 1972. Immediately, that year reminds me that that's the year when the Chinese language was accepted as the official language of Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And you yourself speak fluent Cantonese.
Not as fluent as I would like.
Also speak Cantonese. And you mentioned a lot about dialects in Hong Kong. How do you see the future of this languages, especially the native one. I mean, Hong Kongers, they all consider Hong Kong Cantonese as their culture, an important part of their culture. And yet, I don't know how it's going to evolve. In the past decades already, the Hong Kong Cantonese changed a lot. It's very different nowadays how people speak it compared to back in 1970.
I'm sure that's true. I have always been very aware that the Cantonese of Radio Guangzhou is extraordinarily good. It's a pleasure listening to Radio Canton. The Cantonese is so pure. Radio Hong Kong tends to be far less pure.
That's the same. It's special. It's different from Guangzhou Cantonese.
But Radio Canton, the Cantonese is so good. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The ones that have, what has gone are the rural dialects. Waidao, Yunlonghua, these are dead. To find anyone who speaks Waidao now, you're looking at somebody who's in their 80s or 90s. Young people in the villages can't even understand it. Nobody speaks it. And that, I think, is a pity. The Hakka, there were no significant Hakka dialects within the New Territories. Hakka across the New Territories, west and east, very, very similar from everything I've heard, that Hakka was a very standard dialect, but it's almost dead. Very, very few people speak it now. You have to go a long way to find people speaking it in the streets or in their houses. People aged 50, 60, brought up in the village, probably understand it, but don't speak it. And people aged 20, 30 don't even understand it, let alone speak it. Waidao is even further disappeared. I haven't heard Waidao being spoken in the streets in 50, 60 years, which is a pity. Which is a pity.
Hi. I know you spoke earlier about how kind of village culture and village values is like largely disappeared in urban Hong Kong life. I was wondering, have you, and if so, how and in what way, have you seen kind of these traditional values inform the way kind of the Hong Kong diaspora population have built their network in foreign countries like the UK and in America or Canada?
They tried, and they succeeded for a bit, but nowadays it's disappearing. And it's disappeared almost totally in Hong Kong. Villagers were very aware of what dialect they spoke, not just Cantonese and Hakka, but which dialect of Cantonese they spoke, whether they spoke Gaolonghua or Yunlonghua. They would make jokes at each other because of the difference in dialect. And I've heard those jokes. Most people nowadays wouldn't understand them. A joke in Gaolonghua from Ngā Chin Wai, or from people talking about Ngā Chin Wai. You know, at the Da Ju, they read the list of names of the people. They duk bong, they read the bong. And you read the man's name, then his wife, then the names of his sons, then the name of his brother and his brother's wife and their sons and so on. Well, in Ngā Chin Wai, the dominant surname is Ng. But in Gaolonghua, that's pronounced Ng. And the joke goes, there was a man there called Ng Sang Dak. And his brother was Ng Xu Dak. And when it was read out, Sang Da Xu Da Cai Leung Xu, doesn't make much sense, but it's the same pronunciation in Waidao of what would in Cantonese be Sang Dak, Sei Dak, Cai Leung Sei. This is probably our last question,
Yes, I think this should be the last question. If we have time, we can go back to your question.
Or you can ask me questions
Well,
over
I have
lunch.
a question for you too, but go ahead, please.
Okay. 40 years ago, Mr. David Ford argued in his book about the Eastern New Territories that the lineage and 宗族 is a powerful organizing tool in the world society. My question is, what's your view on the issue based on your research?
Well, David is.
Secondly, is there any development on the lineage in the past 40 years or so?
Well, it's becoming weaker. David Fortescue is very right. It was a critically important factor in the way the villages manage themselves. You have to be careful, because if you take it too far, you end up by saying a village that only has one clan will be more powerful than a village that has 10 clans, which isn't the truth. The village is powerful as well, and the clan is powerful. Different ways of arranging society. Men's society, male society, male society. And it was very important, and a lot of my book talks about the lineages. But I find that the village is probably more important than the lineage in the way things were run. But it's all weakened in the last 30 years. Weakened to the point of disappearing. John.
Yes. Would you like to finish? You had one more question, I think. Yes, go ahead, please. As quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you describe kind of local urban Hong Kongers and then local New Territory indigenous people almost having an antagonizing dynamic. So I wanted to explore more.
Antagonistic may be too strong, but suspicious.
Sure. And then, so John, kind of touching on what you mentioned, when you were the DO, you were the representative of the institution, and the very fact that like British white people came to Hong Kong and then colonized their villages and all. So I'm interested in knowing more about how they perceive you and how they perceive you in relation to the colonial status, and also how they perceive like just British coming over in general.
Well, I remember asking a table of village elders what they thought about being run by foreigners. And the answer was, I don't care if we were run by Martians with green feet, so long as they produced the roads and the hospitals and the schools and did it cheaply. That is a very Chinese attitude. The government is not a matter of politics, it's a matter of efficiency. And if the government is efficient, what does it matter who's running it? And I remember we had a very, very left-wing Labour politician came, and we'd arranged a lunch for him, and we'd arranged a group of Sai Kung village elders who were very poor, many of them. And, you know, this left-wing politician said, why don't you rise up against your oppressors? In those words. And they said, but they do the job well. Again, this view of government as a provider of services. And if they do the job efficiently, why rock the boat? And that, I think, is a very Chinese attitude.
I think it is worth remembering that in 1967, during the riots, the Heung Yikok actually sent a group to the UK to tell Hong Kong Chinese people in the UK that the rioters were the ones to blame, and that in fact they should all be supporting the Hong Kong government rather than opposing it. So a certain kind of practicality or pragmatism there too. Yeah. I want to just ask you one last question, and that is, what is your next book about? And, I'm not going to let you off that quickly. What is your next book about, and what advice do you have to young people who are interested in Hong Kong history?
Well, my next book, if I live long enough to finish it.
Yeah. Drink more water.
I'm too old to produce another book which requires a lot of writing. I'm 78, and, I'll be 79 not in the near future. And you slow down and anyway. What I want to do is publish a series of my articles with a couple of additional essays to be called The Village Scholar. Literacy and scholarship in the traditional village. Because James Hayes discussed it, I've written about it quite extensively. About 55 to 60% of the adult males in the New Territories were literate. We have a superb census in 1911 before any work had been done by the Hong Kong government to change the educational system. And it was a modern Western style survey. And it found 55.6% of the males aged over 16 were literate. 60% in the Southern District. In 1921, much the same, the figures slightly raised, 58%, 62%. So they were literate. Now, I remember I went to a meeting of the AAS, the American Asiatic Society.
Association for Asian Studies.
And I gave a talk on village scholarship, and I was laughed at by the young scholars present, who said everyone knows that the Chinese villagers were all illiterate. None of them could read and write. They were completely under the thumb of their landlords. They were conned left and right by the magistrates. What you're talking about is nonsense. Now, since I know I'm right and that they're wrong, at least for this part of China, because I'm not talking about anywhere else in China, I want to talk about village literacy and scholarship in the New Territories. But not a new book. I'm just going to reprint the articles that I have previously written with a few connecting essays to get it together.
And in less than 1 minute, what advice do you have for young scholars of any age who are interested in local history?
Be brave.
Wow.
Be brave, carry on, and write it. Write it. There are plenty of places around. I remember listening to a talk by Dexter Jed. Do you know Dexter? Sure. He's now doing a PhD in Dublin on a very interesting subject. And I said, publish it. And he said, oh, no, I don't. That's for basically what he was saying is that's for foreigners. That's for senior people. I said, sod off. Give me the text and I will make sure it's published. And it was published in the RAS Journal. Excellent. Be brave.
Excellent advice.
Be self-confident.
Very well. And Pat, thank you for your 5 decades of local history.
Yes.
It's a long time.
It's a long time.
Yes.